So this is genuinely a video that I've given quite a bit of thought, and well, I'm not gonna lie, didn't really for some reason wanted to do this video. Now, part of me did, part of me didn't. It's not that I didn't enjoy the idea, but it was something that I was thinking about because I was like, how much would have changed if Tanjiro actually did have the 10 Shadows technique? And this is my reason for even bringing this up, is because he has to literally summon and more or less kill or exorcise these more or less creatures. And in my book, he would have to, well, kill them. Now, an early version of Tanjiro will not be able to do that, and nothing will stray from the original story initially. So let's just begin from the very beginning, and I'll tell you exactly where things will head to. Now, for starters, everything that happens at the very beginning of the story would be pretty basic. I mean, Tanjiro would go off to sell the charcoal, would head home, and so on, find his family passed on, and his sister Nezuko a demon. Now, this could lead to more or less the same thing that normally happens with Giyu Tomioka and him getting sent off to, well, Urokodaki. Now, you have to make some creative liberties here with the idea of maybe Tanjiro reading and learning, or his family teaching him more about this so-called technique that he was more or less born with. Now, with that said, it's not like he knows inherently how to do all of these things. Maybe he's taught how to actually more or less summon these creatures, but is told to never do so, and unless he's completely and utterly ready. Now, the first one he would learn of is the Divine Dogs, which he would still need to more or less defeat them, but the Divine Dogs would actually benefit him quite a bit, and that honestly will be a continuous plot point throughout this time. But first, he would have to learn from Urokodaki, be taught how to more or less utilize water breathing, and then eventually head off to the final selection. And the final selection, or at least after the final selection, is where I could see him actually deciding that he finally needs to try or attempt to do something, well, like this, like summoning the Divine Dogs. So he actually does decide to do so, and with the help of, well, him, also Urokodaki and Nezuko, he's able to get the final blow in which he defeats a pair of twin wolves, and these are basically capable originally of tearing into curses, devouring them, but each dog has its own more or less tracking abilities, so this could actually help massively in terms of tracking down different demons. And there is massive benefits to this, let's completely be honest, but there is no way of Tanjiro knowing if he could take on the next, well, Shikigami or any other Shikigami that he currently has. Once he does get stronger and has more allies though, I could definitely see him deciding, well, you know what, let me try this, or let's go ahead and try to more or less get more Shikigami from my 10 Shadows technique. But for now, it's pretty basic. The Divine Dogs do help, and adding a companion to Tanjiro and adding that extra firepower will always help, and finding the swamp demon would be even easier. And this is kind of like another example of me saying I don't think things would change very much. I mean, Tanjiro already beat the swamp demon in canon. With the help of the Divine Dogs, or even really without the Divine Dogs, I can see him beating them with, or beating the swamp demon with only Nezuko, and it's a pretty easy feat, in fact, that. Now, with that said, when the first meeting with Muzan, it's a totally different one. The Divine Dogs would help him find Muzan, but it would be something kind of scary, because I feel like the Divine Dogs would more or less react to Muzan as well, and they would have to be unsummoned at least, but Muzan would slightly react to the dogs, thinking that that's kind of odd, that he's never seen something like that, or there's a good chance that maybe he's heard about this through the grapevine, but not really worried too much about it, because, I mean, why would he be? It's just a couple of dogs. He's more worried about actually the scarring on Tanjiro's face that makes him look very similar to Yoriichi, and that would be the main thing that he would be worried about. Like, hands down, he would be more worried about that, or the idea that this person is even related to, well, Yoriichi. Now, this would lead them to obviously taking on the two demons that are sent after them. The Divine Dogs could benefit, could help, you never know. But other than that, it's not, nothing really would change that much, at least for him having the 10 shadows. For one, he's not going to be any weaker than he normally was in canon. He's just going to have the addition of a couple dogs that can help him with more or less tracking and their tracking abilities, and probably would be able to just help more people along the way, which would definitely be something that's a positive. But once he actually goes and meets with Zenitsu and Inosuke after beating all the demons in the mansion, by the way, still going to have a struggle there. The Divine Dogs don't make this an easier fight, so Tanjiro is going to struggle to a certain extent, and the whole one-on-one hand fight boxing thing with Inosuke might even be kind of changed because of the Divine Dogs, because they would most likely help Tanjiro out in that so-called fights. But that's such a minimal part of this whole thing, doesn't really matter too much. But this would lead us to them three being all together, and Tanjiro even speaking with them about his more or less powers, quote unquote, or his 10 shadows technique, bringing up that he has quite a few different summons, and that he could summon them, but he would have to more or less get help to defeat them. And he wants to know if they would be up to do so, because there are quite a few that are on the weaker side, or at least to an extent on the weaker side. We have something like the Rabbit Escape, or maybe the Toad itself, which would be extremely good, by the way, for support and also just overall helping in any fights. So this would lead them to having a conversation about it, and maybe that night they decide to take on some of the weaker versions, maybe take on this so-called, well, Toad, or, you know, something like the rabbits and stuff like that, and get these Shikigami more or less under control. But they talk about how they want to more or less get a stable foundation before they can actually take on more of these things, because they don't know how strong some of them will be. So maybe it'd be best to actually be in a spot where they know that nothing bad's going to happen, especially maybe in like a daylight spot where they can just take on one altogether in complete sync. Of course, Zenitsu does have issue with taking on some of these so-called monsters, because Zenitsu is already, you know, a scaredy cat, so there's a good chance that Zenitsu just is being a little chicken about it. But nonetheless, they head on to the Rui's Mountain, or Mount Natagumo, for the very next kind of arc. And this would be pretty basic in terms of scouting, because we have the Divine Dogs. We have some decent support type Shikigami that could definitely help them throughout this time. So all the fights here would be a little bit easier. Being able to track down the demon slayers that are captured, help them actually out, would be a lot easier. So quite a few of them would actually be able to survive this time around. Now, with that said, it would still end up being a one-on-one fight, Tanjiro versus Rui, or quote-unquote one-on-one fight. But this would help, or it would help that he has the 10 shadows in this regard, because he could either have the Divine Dogs, maybe the Toad, to more or less give him an open strike via the Toad ensnaring the target, or even just the rabbits being able to more or less distract the opponent a mass amount. But Rui's more or less way of fighting would be pretty difficult with the rabbits, because it's a kind of large scale amount of creatures, and he could kind of swipe them all away in one blow, depending on how durable they are. So he would probably decide to try and get an opening with the Toad, or some sort of the Toad-like creature, maybe give him an opening, a clean shot at Rui's neck, and that's exactly what he looks for. But it would be the awakening of sun breathing that would definitely be the next step in his process. You could still make the argument that he doesn't even kill Rui. Maybe Rui sees that he's stunned, or sees that he's ensnared, unable to move for a split second, so he cuts off his own head. Nonetheless, you still have Giyu Tomioka arriving very, very soon. So when Giyu arrives, I mean, there you go. You have Giyu more or less help and actually take down this so-called kind of lower moon demon. And then they all head to the Hashira mansion very soon after, under the premise that Tanjiro is in a bit of trouble because he is harboring a demon. Now, all of that goes exactly the same. I mean, there's no reason for it to change drastically or any differently. But this time, with him training, would actually give him the ability to unlock a couple more Shikigami that might actually drastically help him. I mean, there's Shikigami that he can definitely get help from either Hashira if they decide to actually help, or, you know, Zenitsu and Inosuke once they're fully recovered and actually a little bit stronger from the training of the concentration breathing constant. That's where I think he would learn how to, or not summon, but he would be able to actually control the Nu, which is a winged Shikigami creature, more or less, and it can actually support and carry Tanjiro in this regard, so mobility is way higher because of it. And he also has this temporary paralyzation attack that would be definitely beneficial in a fight. You can even go down the list a little bit, talking about the Great Serpent, which he most likely would be able to actually take down with the help of the others, of course, because as long as he gets the final blow, it should be all right, and that should be the end-all be-all for being able to utilize these creatures. You could make the argument that he could possibly take down the elephant or the max elephant, but for now, I don't think it's that big of a deal to include or exclude the elephant from his repertoire. So we'll hold off on saying anything about that specifically, but this would lead us to the Mugen train. And of course, Enmu would be slightly easier just for the creatures that he has. Maybe even the Shikigami would have a part in waking all of them up, and also just taking down Enmu in general. I mean, the Nu itself would be able to fly outside of the train that is currently moving and be able to look for an attack to help out Inosuke and Zenitsu, and more specifically Tanjiro. So they would be able to take down Enmu pretty easily, but the arrival of Akaza is where things drastically change, because quickly, well, Tanjiro realizes that this fight is not winnable, that Rengoku seems to be actually keeping up to an extent, but there's just no way he can necessarily help. He tries his best to utilize some of his Shikigami, but when he does, Akaza quickly disposes, or at least threatens to dispose of them. So this forces more or less Tanjiro to not allow them to die, which is a sketchy thing, leading to actually the awakening of the divine dogs, more or less being fused within each other, creating the divine dog totality. But even that is not going to make that big of a difference to Akaza himself, which is, he's a scary feat. So Rengoku would even tell him to stop trying to help, especially when Akaza threatens to more or less kill Tanjiro in one swift blow. And Rengoku realizes that this is a fight to the death and that he is trying to just stall out Akaza, but he won't be able to necessarily stop him from trying to kill someone like Tanjiro, that there's a good chance that he won't be able to stop him once again. And soon we'd see, unfortunately, Rengoku pass on and die. This time around, not living like in some of my what ifs. I know quite a few of them does have Rengoku living one way or another, but this time Rengoku would not live on. I don't think the 10 Shadows technique would be helpful enough, and I honestly think Akaza might be too strong. And like I said before, I don't think Tanjiro would be that much stronger because he's having the 10 Shadows technique, and I only mean that in a way of physically stronger, right? So his way of using water breathing and stuff like that. Normally with these what ifs, you have it so, oh, Tanjiro's stronger because he's more of a prodigy, or he learns faster, or something like that. But this time around, that's not necessarily even the case. So it kind of strays away from that idea. And of course, we continue with our training after the fact, especially after Rengoku's passing. He would meet, obviously, Rengoku's father, but this doesn't really matter. This is all more or less the same, except for the fact that he might learn a little bit more from the Rengokus. Maybe he learns a little bit from Rengoku's father about the 10 Shadows technique, and so on. But in my book, I think he would know before some of you, I'm sure some of you are curious. I truly believe he does know Maharaga exists, but he's also been told to never summon Maharaga. and that it's more or less a death wish to a large extent, because he has to exercise or defeat Maharaga, and he has no way of doing that. And as a little kid who literally wasn't even threatened by anything necessarily, I mean, when he was younger, he straight up was not in the line of fire. I mean, his father would tell him that there should be no reason for him to have to summon that monster, and that he should worry about just living a good life. But obviously that's not the case anymore. I mean, he's in a pretty bad spot overall. But I will say, going into the fight against Daki, and also going into the fight against Gyutaro, these Shikigami will actually have quite a bit of an effect here, in terms of just everything they're capable of doing. For one, like, rabbit escape could be helpful in terms of just distracting with a mass amount of rabbits. You could have maybe the serpent, who can ensnare and also immobilize targets, at least to an extent. The new being able to move them around very quickly, paralyze targets, divine dog, same thing. More or less, these things are going to benefit him drastically in this 2v2 fight. It will actually turn the tides drastically, because it's no longer necessarily 2 versus 1, 2 versus 1. It's not going to be like just Tengen and Tanjiro versus Gyutaro. I mean, you have the summons to drastically help overall. So I definitely see them beating Daki and Gyutaro a little bit cleaner in this regard, but Tengen would still be pretty injured, a little bit less injured than he would be in the original. But I mean, we knew that he was going to retire nonetheless, and we'd have the whole scene with him and Igoro talking about how he can't retire, that he has to retire when he's dead, and so on. But that doesn't really make a difference. But he still retires. And now we're still down Tengen and also Rengoku. And like I've said before, the Shikigami is just drastically going to help him via support, right? Via these support-esque type roles. Most of the Shikigami aren't like crazy impactful in terms of raw strength. I mean, outside of Maharaga, which I will talk about Maharaga briefly. And also briefly talk about another theory of the 10 shadows that could be implemented in Demon Slayer, which would be interesting, and maybe I'll do a video on that later. But for one, going into the fight at the Swordsmith Village, it would go about the same, outside of the fact that they would have more help from the Shikigami against Hantengu, so they would actually be able to more or less have an easier time against them. And it's kind of the same thing against Akaza. Tanjiro has grown so much with strength, power, and so on. So when he faces Akaza with Giyu, and on top of that is able to utilize a Shikigami, or one of his Shikigami, maybe it's the fully combined Divine Dog, or the totality, Divine Dog totality, or just some other more or less Shikigami. Maybe it's a max elephant that he ends up exercising, or anything else that he ends up exercising, depending on the circumstance. I mean, shoot. I mean, at this point, he is pretty strong. Maybe he's able to get some help and take down the round deer, who would more or less allow them to heal through reverse curse technique. But of course, technically reverse curse technique doesn't really exist in this world, but maybe it does, or maybe it adds at least a healing ability to them, and giving them that support as well, which would be massively beneficial, by the way, because we know that the endgame battle is a pretty tough one. And this would definitely give them the leg up on Akaza, and they ended up beating Akaza in the first place. So once they're able to have that leg up on Akaza, it's a pretty done deal, especially with the help of the Shikigami. And I actually been wanting to talk about this quite a bit, because this is where I think things change. We know, as viewers of Demon Slayer, we know that if you erase Shikigami, this version of Tanjiro and everybody else will be able to actually defeat Muzan. But at the end of the day, this version of Tanjiro doesn't know that. He sees all of his friends extremely injured, and he sees himself drastically injured as well, needing time to actually recover just a little bit. So what does he think about doing? Well, he thinks about summoning the one thing nobody else, or basically all his family, told him to never summon, and that would be Maharaga. Now, this is where things get very, very sticky in terms of power scaling, and I'm not going to talk about it too much, but I think an earlier on Muzan, someone that isn't necessarily poisoned or depleted too badly, could kill Maharaga, at least before Maharaga drastically adapts to every single move he ever does. But this is a pretty crazy stalemate tactic, at least to a degree. So it's kind of like the hope is to send out Maharaga, summon Maharaga, have Maharaga fight Muzan, and hope that more or less Muzan kills Maharaga earlier on, which is something I believe would happen. Now, with that said, if Maharaga does scale up to Muzan and gets to the point where he can actually defeat him, or at least defeat him in terms of just outpace him and stuff like that, and then eventually Muzan dies, we might be sitting in a situation where all of these Demon Slayers are kind of effed. Because now you have something like Maharaga, who, if, and this is a big if, does scale to Muzan, then we're dealing with a Maharaga that doesn't die to sunlight, and yeah, the Demon Slayers are screwed. But with that said, I think a peak Muzan that is like not fully depleted because of the antidotes would actually be able to defeat Maharaga, giving the Demon Slayers some time to recover overall. And this would be perfect because now we have a fresher Demon Slayers, a group of Demon Slayers, Hashira, Tanjiro, and so on. And you may even see a couple extra people survive this final battle. And, well, the final battle goes a lot smoother than normal, at least just in my opinion. As always, this is my opinion. Now, with that said, you might be wondering, okay, what's the other version that you were talking about? I won't talk about it for too long because this actually might be something I do in the future, just not in the 10 Shadows format. We could have adapted the 10 Shadows to more or less using demons as Shikigamis. More or less him, as he slays a demon, he actually is able to summon that demon under his full control, which would be an interesting prospect. Maybe we'll do something like what if Tanjiro could control demons or something like that in the future. But for now, this is how I decided to go about this story of what if Tanjiro had the 10 Shadows technique. If you enjoyed, show some love, leave a like, leave a sub, leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. Hope y'all enjoyed the video. As always, leave comments in the comment section below about what you would like to see, because I need ideas. I just realized how many ideas I have in my kind of bank of ideas. Normally I have a ton of them. Right now I don't have that many. So if you have any, put them in the comment section below. As always, I hope y'all enjoyed, and I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.